In this video we'll examine the phenomenon of shadow. Within the field of human psychology, the term shadow refers to those aspects of our individual consciousness of which we are unaware. The concept of shadow is closely correlated with the concept of the unconscious, which was popularized around the turn of the 20th century by Austrian neurologist and founder of psychoanalysis Sigmund Freud. To get a general idea of the difference between the conscious and the unconscious parts of ourselves, consider how, if we make a fist and then extend our fingers again, this process occurs within our individual consciousness. After all, we're aware of this activity. Many other instances of physical activity, however, such as the production of skin cells on the soles of our feet and the breakdown of red blood cells in our liver, all occur outside of our individual consciousness. After all, we're unaware of this activity. In a similar way, our behavior is influenced by a variety of conscious and unconscious psychological processes. For instance, if we're out walking and we choose to cross the road, then the psychological decision-making process related to the physical action of crossing the road occurs within our individual consciousness. After all, we're aware of choosing to cross the road. However, if we're a person who is afraid of dogs and while out walking we suddenly realize that we crossed the road a few seconds ago without even knowing it, and when we look over our shoulder we see a dog sitting on the pavement on the other side of the road, then the psychological decision-making process related to the physical action of crossing the road occurred unconsciously or outside of our individual consciousness. After all, we're unaware of having chosen to cross the road. Or to put it differently, we unconsciously crossed the road driven by our fear of dogs. Now, in a simplified version of Freud's view, our psychological self in the upper left individual interior I dimension is divided into three major parts, namely the I, the it, and the over-I. Think of the I, or the conscious part of ourselves, as a young adult. Think of the it, or the unconscious part of ourselves, as a wild beast who continually urges the young adult to impulsively act out sexual, aggressive, and other instinctual drives. And think of the over-I, or the hyperconscious part of ourselves, as a police officer who continually urges the young adult to live more consciously and to conform to the expectations of friends, family, colleagues, and society. According to Freud, much of the psychological life of human individuals is characterized by the struggle of the conscious self to balance the impulses of the unconscious self with the moral conscience of the hyperconscious self. Next, to examine the relationship between the I, the it, the over-I, and the shadow, it's useful to revisit our analogy from the previous video in which all possible ways of inhabiting reality are represented by the surface inside of this rectangle, and in which our soul, or existential body, is represented by a circle covering some possibilities but not others. Within this analogy, the I, or our conscious self, which we compare to a young adult, lives within the boundaries of this circle. The it, or our unconscious self, which we compare to a wild beast, also lives within the boundaries of this circle and continually tries to pull the young adult towards the edge of the circle, towards the realm of the unconscious. The over-I, or our hyperconscious self, which we compare to a police officer, also lives within the boundaries of the circle and continually tries to pull the young adult to the center of the circle, as far away from the realm of the unconscious as possible. In addition, think of the young adult as holding a flashlight. The beam from this flashlight represents our attention. For although the surface inside of the circle represents all that we can be conscious of, we're not conscious of all that we can be conscious of all at once, all of the time. Rather, we're only conscious of those aspects of reality which are currently illuminated by the beam of our attention. For instance, throughout this video so far, you probably weren't consciously thinking about your first childhood memory. But if you aim your beam of attention at that part of your consciousness, then the image of your first childhood memory will likely instantly appear within your awareness. Incidentally, in the Freudian view, while we're awake, it's relatively easy for the police officer to keep the young adult away from the unconscious. However, As soon as we go to sleep, the influence of the police officer becomes weaker and the wild beast easily pulls the young adult to the edge of the circle where, during the dream state, the young adult aims the flashlight beam outside of the circle and temporarily catches a glimpse of the unconscious. According to Freud, the goal of his psychological therapy was to bring as much of the unconscious as possible into the light of the conscious. This is why Freud said, "Wo es war, soll ich werden," which is German for "where it was, there I shall be," which essentially means that by analyzing our dreams and our unconscious behaviors, we can explore the unconscious and gradually expand the boundary of our individual consciousness. In addition to Freud's unconscious, the Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Carl Jung observed that within the circle of our individual consciousness, there also exist certain areas of unconsciousness, or to be more precise, areas which are potentially available to our awareness, but which we instinctively strive to avoid perceiving because they're disturbing to us. Carl Jung referred to the collection of these unilluminated areas within our individual consciousness as our shadow. To explore the phenomenon of shadow within the context of our previous analogy, imagine that we are the young adult and that whenever the beam of our attention illuminates a disturbing part of ourselves, we automatically switch off our flashlight to avoid acknowledging that particular aspect of ourselves. Our shadow, then, consists of the areas of our consciousness of which we would unconsciously rather remain unconscious. It's useful to divide our shadow into two parts, namely 1, golden shadow, and 2, dark shadow. Think of our golden shadow as the part of our shadow which contains all aspects of humanity which we idolize in others, but which we insufficiently recognize in ourselves. And think of our dark shadow as the part of our shadow which contains all aspects of humanity which we condemn in others, but which we insufficiently acknowledge in ourselves.